Welcome to the Software Engineering Institute's 9th Annual Insider Risk Management Symposium. My name is Randy Trezak, Principal Researcher and Technical Director in the CERT Division of the SEI. It is my privilege to provide the opening remarks to this event, as well as introduce our first two speakers for the day. This is a two-day event, with day two being tomorrow, Wednesday, September 8th, from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And we're extremely pleased to have over 500 registrants for the event for today and tomorrow. As you're likely aware, September 2022 is the 4th annual National Insider Threat Awareness Month, which is a collaborative effort between the National Counterintelligence and Security Center, the National Insider Threat Task Force, the Office of Undersecretary of Defense Intelligence and Security, Department of Homeland Security, and the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. The purpose of this month is to emphasize the importance of safeguarding our nation by detecting, deterring, and mitigating insider threats. National Insider Threat Awareness Month seeks to encourage employees in government and the private sector to recognize behaviors of concern and report them so early intervention can occur, leading to positive outcomes for at-risk individuals and reduce risk to organizations. Keeping with this theme, the SEI has developed content for this two-day event to highlight the research to assist in insider risk reduction. I want to begin by thanking the hard work. Thanks to folks that have completed several things to make this event happen. Thank you to Dan Costa, Technical Manager of CERT's Enterprise Threat and Vulnerability Management Team, members of the SEI's event staff, broadcast media, and business development teams for pulling this all together. A second thank you to our event sponsor, Forcepoint. Throughout the event, you'll have the opportunity to hear about Forcepoint and their contributions towards insider threat mitigation. I also want to take the opportunity to thank our keynote speaker, our panelists, the panel moderators for volunteering their time, creating an amazing agenda, one that will provide actionable steps you can immediately integrate into your enterprise risk management program. We hope you're able to attend both days of the symposium. Before we begin, I want to cover a few of the logistics for the event. This event is intended for invited guests only. There'll be no media in attendance, and we ask that you follow the Chatham House rules, not attributing any content to a specific organization unless express approval is granted by a speaker. And if you do have any questions, we ask you to submit them through the chat feature within YouTube. Your questions will be directed to the speakers to be addressed during the live Q&A session following each keynote or panel discussion. And at the end of the symposium, we hope you will take the time to complete the survey, providing feedback on content, speakers, and agenda. And finally, as we begin planning for our 10th annual Insider Threat Symposium, we hope to see you in person. Now, it's my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker for the event, General Greg Twohill, current director of the CERT Division of the Software Engineering Institute. Prior to accepting the role in CERT, Greg was the president of Appgate Federal, a provider of products and services to civilian government and defense agencies. In his government career, he was appointed by former President Obama to be the first Chief Information Security Officer of the United States government. He also served in the Department of Homeland Security as Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Cybersecurity and Communications, where he concurrently served as the Director of the National Cybersecurity and Integration Center. And I also want to recognize his military career, which spanned over 30 years in the United States Air Force as an operational commander at the squadron, group, and wing levels. Greg, thank you for your participation in the Insider Risk Management Symposium, and I now turn it over to you for opening remarks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Twohill, CERT Director here at the Software Engineering Institute of Carnegie Mellon University. And I'd like to welcome you today to our CERT Insider Risk Management Symposium. Our theme for our conversation during this symposium is From Data to Decisions. And the reason we picked that is because today's environment in the information technology and cyberspace environment has featured a dramatic shift from in-office, like I am today, to a more heterogeneous environment, including remote work, where folks are out in different places and working from anywhere, from home, on the road, it doesn't matter. Your work anywhere changes the calculus on how we look at insider risk. We want to make sure that we take into a corporation also the fact that we've gone through in the work environment a great change in our workforce. And the dynamics of our workforce have changed with things like the Great Resignation, where folks have been changing jobs at a frequency and a pace that's been unprecedented in today's modern history. As a result, we have to be proactive in taking a look at the insider threat and the risks that come from that. So insider risk is the thematic element that helps us understand what our overall cyber risks are. And we take a look at that through the lens of our enterprise risk. And data is the key to helping us make informed decisions. We're also taking a look at the impact of mis, dis, and malinformation. We're going to call it MDM as an acronym. But MDM has been identified as a significant factor in changing people's perceptions and affecting, in a negative way, their roles in organizations. It presents a new vector in insider threat and insider risk. So as we have our conversation in this symposium, let's make sure that we're not losing the fact that MDM is out there. And we want to make sure that we are proactive in our approaches, as well as identifying some best practices on how to deal with MDM in the marketplace, in the workplace, at home, in the office. We want to make sure that as part of this conversation in the symposium, we're touching on MDM, and we look forward to your inputs on that as well. As we take a look forward, one of the things that we've done here at the CERT is we're putting together and finalizing that 7th edition of the CERT Common Sense Guide to Mitigating Insider Threats. And we'd like to thank you for your contributions to it as we help refine the analytics, demonstrate the impacts, and reduce risk by using data as a source of helping us better identify and manage risk. And putting together those best practices to help others is all part of what we do as a CERT, but also helping you as our community of interest to do better in managing insider risk. We appreciate your contributions. We appreciate your conversations and the lessons that you pass on to us and others in this conversation that we're having here in this symposium. And we welcome you and look forward to having a great conference this year. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, Greg, for providing your opening remarks. Now it is my privilege to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Robert Ditmore, Technical Team Lead of Insider Risk in the CERT Division of the Software Engineering Institute. Bob will be presenting Modernizing Test and Evaluation for Insider Risk Analysis. Bob, over to you.
Thank you, Randy, and welcome everybody. In this session, I would like to cover some of the thought process that we put into coming up with our test and evaluation environment that we use here at the CERT for our research and for various testing and evaluation purposes. Hopefully, some of the capabilities that I talk about today and some of that thought process that we went in to come up with are modernizing our test and evaluation environment can be something that you can take back to your programs and maybe use within your own programs. So when we talk about testing approaches, whenever we're working with organizations, helping them come up with their first initial operating concept, their IOC, or their first milestones of starting up a program, one of the approaches that we recommend is taking like a penetration type testing approach to their testing. So when we teach the Insider Threat Program Management and Implementation and Operation course, we go over this kind of approach and we talk about 2 different kind of capabilities that you would bring with this type of testing approach. There's like an overt and a covert approach. So similar to the cybersecurity penetration type testing, you're going to use the existing network organizational resources to actually come up with some sort of test. So for our purposes, applying this to the insider risk approach, we would go through different types of scenarios, say IT sabotage or intellectual property theft, that would be important to the organization's overall insider threat or insider risk programs scope, and come up with, walk through all of the different approaches that type of a scenario might have, come up with a script that you would want to run on some systems and inject those activities into your network. As part of that, as an overt approach, you can see various pluses and minuses for doing these types of approaches. So if we're injecting those type of threats into the network, and you're taking an overt approach, what you're doing is you're saying, this is the type, we're going to be doing this testing, we're going to be doing this testing at this time, we're going to bring the staff together, and we're actually going to see what occurs when this activity, this insider risk activity, is injected into our networks. So the nice thing about the positive to this approach is that you are exercising those insider risk scenarios that are important to the scope and overall mission of your insider threat or your organization's insider threat program. The other positive benefit that you get from the overt testing is that you're bringing the teams together, you're testing the processes and procedures with the team's knowledge. So you're stepping through and you're making sure that, okay, we're going to now inject the threat. We're now seeing the threat. Okay, how are we reacting? Are we reacting properly? Another positive benefit that you get from this is you actually, if you've got new folks in, or for the folks that haven't seen a particular threat in a while, you actually train your staff to actually use those, make sure that they are able to handle those types of scenarios when they do come up, if they come up in a live setting. One of the downsides to this is that it does require staff time to execute. So you do have to set time aside. You have to get these systems all lined up, and you have to bring everybody together and then walk through these through this kind of capability. Now, one of the things that you could do, so another downside to this is you are injecting activity into an operational network. One of the approaches that you can take on the overt side to kind of mitigate that negative is to actually have a designated system with a designated test user that you would say, this is where we're going to inject the activity so that you know where that it does occur. But since it's an overt test, everybody knows that it's going to occur. And so setting it up on a system that is designated for testing is not too big of a problem for this type of approach. Now, on the covert side of testing, what we see is, again, we're exercising those insider risk scenarios. So again, you're coming up with those scenarios that are important to your overall insider threat program's scope, and coming up with those scripts for that. But on the plus side here, again, in addition to testing the processes and the procedures, you're also testing the team readiness, because the team is not aware of when the covert testing is going to be done. Another advantage to the covert testing is you can get third parties to come in and execute those scripts, again, with proper executive leadership team consent and understanding when it's going to be done, so that it can be scoped and the leadership can know that it's a test versus a real live event that might be occurring on the network. But again, on the downside, it is injecting activity into the operational network. And then, unlike the overt case where you could say have a designated system, if you did have that designated system in a covert case and you saw activity on there, the team would immediately spot that. So it wouldn't benefit from a covert, and you wouldn't really be testing team readiness if you use that system. So what you have to do is actually take over a system, inject the threats on that system, which may have somebody operating on it. And what it does is it can leave some residue of that activity that may look like it came from actually a trusted member of your organization. So you have to be very careful with these injecting activities in a covert case, because it can look like it could be an activity that was occurred on an individual. So you have to make sure that you're very careful about when the time it occurred, what systems it occurred, and then you make sure that you can remove that information from your systems so that that person doesn't look like they had actually committed that insider activity. But the one thing you'll notice with this particular case is that both of them assume that the sensors and the analytics are already in place. So by that, I mean, what you're not testing is, oh, well, we have this, we're getting this telemetry from this part of the system, or, we're running these particular analytics here. And so that kind of raises the question. So again, what we're talking about is testing here for programs that are just starting to come up to initial operating capacity, or starting those first crawl walk steps for their program and getting it up and running. But then how do you test your analytics? How do you test your sensors? Again, if we're doing this in a operational network, one of the things that we have to be concerned about is that it is very risky to start to test sensors and analytics on that operational network. And this slide here shows two potential, among many other types of negative consequences if that testing goes awry. The first one is that if the testing goes awry, you could disrupt the overall mission of the organization. So you could overwhelm network resources, and we've seen this occur where the Insider Threat Program, oh, we're going to put a new analytic out there and put it on a live network, and then all of a sudden it starts sending a lot of data back to the servers. It could potentially overwhelm the network, so that the actual mission that your team needs to do its work, they don't have the networking resources and bandwidth to actually go and do that work. The other thing you can see is it could potentially like, oh, well, we're going to put out this particular sensor on these systems, like say a host-based system. We put a new sensor out there, and it spikes resource utilization. So the individual might be trying to get work done, and that impacts productivity. They can't get the work done that they need with their systems because your sensor wasn't tuned right, or it's impacting those particular types of systems. And these types of disruptions to the overall organizational mission is very deleterious to your insider risk program, your insider threat program, because it looks like you're stopping the system, you're stopping the organization from actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. So you're going to get this kind of like, well, they're going to start pointing fingers at the insider threat program, and they're like, well, you guys are we can't do this work. So nothing really quickly deteriorates the effectiveness of a program if you start trying to do this testing, and then it goes gets out of hand. Then all of a sudden the team can't the overall organization can't do its work. So you need to make sure that this type of testing is not done on a live network because it can have these negative consequences. One of the ways to work around this, again, when we start thinking about, okay, well, what do we want in our testing environment? We can borrow from the DevOps world and come and bring in kind of like we'll have a test environment, and we'll have the development environment, test environment, and then finally the operational environment. And you go through the steps to kind of work through that kind of approach. So you can get around this sort of thing, but again, not doing this on an operational network. You have to start, going from a initial program starting up to starting getting more sophisticated and figuring out how you're going to test these different parts of your insider threat program. The other impact that you might have is to your analysts. If you are all of a sudden starting to flood, you put out a analytic or a sensor that's going to flood your network, it's also going to flood the tools that your analysts are using, and they're going to start seeing a lot of false positives because these aren't things that you're trying to catch. So they're just spending all their time trying to clear these alerts, like, okay, yeah, that sensor, yeah, that's not really an error, and you're constantly trying to clear that. And what that'll do is it'll start to cause alert fatigue in your analyst. And then what might potentially happen is that it'll cause the analyst to actually miss the true positive, either due to that fatigue or that excessive noise that's coming in. So again, we don't want to bring in testing on these types of sensors and analytics into the operational environment. But when we're looking at those sensors and analytics types testing, we have to say, what are we trying to test here, right? When we're looking at, that sensors, the things that are providing the telemetry, the data sources, and at the analytic level, if you want to improve your testing capability for your program, you have to ask yourself some of these types of questions of what you're trying to test. Like, will my indicator work, right? Does it tell my analyst something that they can do in action, right? Was it a policy violation? Was it something that they can go, yes, we need to actually respond to this? The other thing you want to ask is, are my analytics effective and efficient, right? So do I have the data and the data sources and the fields that I need to actually run my analytic? And by analytic here, what we're talking about is some tools out there will give you an indicator, oh, this was a policy violation. Not a lot of plug USB sticks in. A USB stick was plugged in. That's an indicator. When we start to get a little bit more advanced, we want to start to build out these models of behavior over time that we are saying, okay, this looks risky. So what we need to do here is actually come up with analytics that have patterns in them, time-based, and have various sequences of different indicators that are out there. So it's the next step of starting to pull these indicators together to come up with a more advanced analytic that's out there. And what we want to do is, can it produce timely results? Since we're doing more advanced computation, what does it actually produce results in a timely fashion? If it takes several days to crunch all that data to come up with a result, is that actually going to be good enough to actually stop a insider event that might be occurring? So again, does it actually come, can you actually produce the results fast enough that the organization can use it? Another question we get frequently is there a better sensor for analytics, right? I looked at, one particular example is I could use a user activity monitoring to look for data moving, or I could use a data loss prevention tool to look for data that might be moving that looks suspicious. So I can use either one of these tools. How do I know what sensor is better for my analytics? What sensor is better for my program? So this is the other part of what we're trying to test when we're talking about it at this, the sensor level, telemetry level, and the analytic level. And then finally, a question we're getting more and more frequently as as the data grows bigger, as we get more data coming in, as we get more telemetry, is, hey, can I use an artificial intelligence machine learning algorithm out there to help me find the scenario that's of interest to your insider threat program? Again, based on that scope of your program and based on those scenarios that we talked about before of what's important to your organization. And, again, these AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms are very dependent on having good data sets available. So, what you're getting and producing, can you test those sort of things to actually find what's of interest to your program? So let's kind of pop this up at a higher level here and take a look at the overall picture. So what we're talking about here is, okay, when we talked about that, how you're trying to motivate that program that's first coming up, is we're operating in an operational environment, right? We're running tests on the operational environment. We're injecting threats into that environment. The next thing we want to build on is we might want to test at that risk model level, right? The sequence of patterns, those models that we want to kind of build together to say, okay, this is what a model of risky behavior looks like to my program. Then at the lower below, what we're building those risk models on are those potential risk indicators that we're getting out from the different tools that are out there. And finally, at the bottom is just all that data that's moving around on our networks, on our systems, that we can actually use to build to say, okay, this is what normal behavior looks like, and this is what abnormal behavior looks like, and this is what I'm starting to look for. So what we can do is, looking at these different levels, right? What we can do is we can say, can I test at these different levels? And with that, can I, either collect data from my systems and take it over into my testing environment, or can I actually generate that data? So when I have the word generate here, I mean, can I collect or can I programmatically produce this sort of thing? So again, going from the bottom, it is possible to actually generate log data. If I know what it looks like, I can either gather that data off the system, and you'll see a lot of different approaches to that, where they'll run a system, they'll take the data, and then they'll say, okay, here's the data that we're using. The other thing we can do is, well, if I know what these different tools, like say my data loss prevention tool looks like, and I know what the alerts look like, or I know what my printer logs look like, or that sort of thing, and I'm looking for like data that's going on in my printer, the DLP, I can actually generate those indicators directly. So I don't need the log data, but I can actually generate that at an indicator level. At the modeling level, usually at that point, you're trying to model these different behaviors, and what you do is run simulations on it. So you would actually say, okay, well, if this happened and this happened and this happened, and you start to put these models together, and then you can use simulation tools to go through that and say, okay, yeah, this is a probability that this would happen, or this kind of information might happen. And then finally, it's that overall, we want that operational environment. We want to be able to take a look at an environment with everything moving so that we can actually put together a system. And, is it possible to collect all the data, collect the indicators, put our models to it, and actually, come up with a test environment where we can actually generate all this operational data or collect all this operational data out there. So with those different areas that we can ask questions, though, each one of these are going to have, issues with these different approaches. At that, generating the log data level or collecting the log data level, it's going to be hard to scale, right? If there's a lot of data, how much of it do you want to actually collect? How much do you actually want to generate? So there's a scalability issue that you have at that bottom. Another, again, scalability is not only the amount of data, but what happens, if you want to try different data sources, that sort of thing. Then you also have to scale those and figure out how to work that in. The next level up, it's like, again, it's hard to what if other types of scenarios for these indicators. So again, if your organization is already using, say, a data loss prevention tool, and you know what those indicators look like, well, if you wanted to bring in another indicator and you wanted to what if, well, can I, what if I use this, or what if I get these types of alerts, would I be able to find this kind of information? You have to go and either bring those tools in, collect that information, run that, or you have to try to figure out what those logs are going to look like. So it becomes complicated to run a lot of different scenarios out there. At the next level up, right, is those generating those models or collecting that information to run these models and run these simulations. When you're starting to run simulations, what happens is you start to make a lot of assumptions about the underlying systems. So you do have some issues maintaining that realism of what's actually going on the network. So the models are good, they might tell you something, but you have to then always question, what are the assumptions that went into building this model? And do I know they're realistic? And is it something that we can actually build off of and actually come up with an actionable capability for our insider threat program? And finally, generating the operational data level. At that top level, again, if we're taking raw data, we don't know if we have ground truth, right? If you're just collecting the data from all these different systems, your live operating system, or you're doing that test, the pen test like a covert or overt test, there may be somebody on the system that actually may be an insider threat that or doing activities that are risky behavior. And that data is also going to be in there. And especially when you go to try to train AI or ML models, that may impact your model to be able to detect it, because it may detect that bad behavior as just normal behavior. And then when it's looking for anomalies, it might not catch that particular data. So you have to be very careful that you're maintaining ground truth. And this is something that whenever you're looking at the literature for insider threat, insider risk, is how do you deal with the data that you have to have that ground truth to it. So with that all said, what we want to kind of take a look at is, what are some of the things that we want in our test and evaluation environment, right? And so in this environment that we want to build, right, building an ideal system, right, I want to be able to have, ground truth. I want to have that realism of the systems underneath it. I want the ability to what if different scenarios rapidly, and I want scalability. Can I add different things? Now, some of the other, when we had these discussions and we were building out our environment, a couple other goals came up that, we wanted reasonable costs, and we wanted to be able to come up with a lot of different types of telemetry to make sure that we can test these different scenarios and work those out. So what we ended up coming up with our approach was what we called needle stack cloud. So initially, we based this off of a virtual machine environment, which we called needle stack. And the reason we called it needle stack was, again, we all know the the old saying, that, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Well, if you have a very powerful magnet, that's actually a very simple problem to solve. What's actually harder to solve is looking for a piece of hay in a needle stack. And that being way more painful seems to align better with, the insider mission that insider risk mission that we're trying to accomplish here. So we ended up calling it needle stack. And then as we went down and are modernizing our test environment, we're moving it over to the cloud. So we called it needle stack cloud. And the three things that we build our approach off was infrastructure as code. This allowed us, rapid setup and tear down of environments. And what we did is based on that previous environment that was in the VM system, we went from, set up and tear down of environments from days or weeks down to minutes. Being that it's code, I can easily go in and change the code to try different environments. I can scale the environments fairly quickly. I can say I want this many systems, that many systems. It's just a matter of changing a couple config files, and you've got that new environment. And the other thing is, with our VM approach, we were limited to what the capacity of our VM machines. With the cloud-based approach, we were actually able to run multiple environments simultaneously. So again, the scalability of the types of environments that we're running is based basically on cost, right? How much capacity do you want to actually use? The cloud-based approach provided us scaling at a reasonable cost. And then another bonus that we got out of it is, although we could share our VM servers outside, it was very difficult because they were really within systems behind our firewalls. And so we had to really work with IT to get folks on the outside to be able to access our test environment. Moving it to a cloud-based approach was that, here's our environment, here's a login, go have fun, use it, right? And finally, the last thing, which was where we're really, the hard thing to try to really do with different test environments is get to that ground truth. And what we did is we came up with a non-player character approach, an NPC, borrowed from the gaming community. And what this does is we run a bunch of non-player characters that we know what they're doing, so we know exactly what's in our environment, and we can say, oh yes, this is what occurred, this is what's going on, that's good. So again, we get check marks across all those environments with our needle stack cloud approach. So kind of wrapping up here, this is kind of a diagram of what we're doing and some of the tools that we're using to actually run this. We started, and again, this is like an Amazon web environment, so you're familiar with that. But at the time, it was just easiest for us to go with the Amazon and align better with some of our customers and collaborators. So we just went with AWS. This approach does not preclude going to any of the other cloud platforms. And that was kind of the model, is like down the road, if we have a reason to switch, we have at least a pattern, and then we can take it to these other environments. But what you see here is that we originally modeled a financial network of about 100 users. So what we do is, when we could spin up, we have a user network where we can have, up to, in our case, 100, but it was just an artificial cap that we put because we came up with scenarios for those 100 different users. From the server approach, we have, all the different things you would see, like email exchange, security event and information manager types of tools out there. We could put all these different host-based solutions on there. Again, they all become, configurations that we would run through, say, Ansible scripts to build out these environments, to build out these machine images. And then we would run our infrastructure as code using a tool out there called Terraform. And again, fire off a command, walk down, get a cup of coffee, come back, and my environment's up and running, and I'm ready to go and start testing. You can see the Ghost server. Again, this is actually another product produced here at the CMU. Some of our colleagues, they use it for cyber event testing, workplace development, and they also use it for capture the flag cyber events and use it for that sort of thing. So it's very good for getting users that what are doing on these systems and be able to control what they're doing. And finally, we went with Apache Guacamole to set up the Bastion server. So again, where it's easy to be able to run these sort of things is that we just give you a login to the Bastion server, and then you get access to our systems. So again, with this model, again, we've actually used it for testing various types of tools, running different analytics that we thought, I could easily throw up here a regression, a package for doing statistics. I can throw programming environments up there. I can put machines up there like a hub and run all these different types of analytics to make sure I understand how they're working. I can look at all the different types of indicators that are coming back from these different systems. I can see the flow of traffic that's going through it. There's a lot that I can do to get that sensors telemetry to make sure that I can, put this as a test environment, making sure that if I put a new analytic out there or a new sensor out there, it's not going to flood my network. It's not going to overwhelm my user boxes out there. And finally, we've actually used this type of environment where we've used we've actually given the folks that, the Bastion login, and they actually come in and help, test and train some of the new folks that are coming up to use the different tools that are out there. So again, we're actually using it for a training environment, and you can easily see how you could use this type of environment where there's data being generated. You can go in, log in at any one of these users. You don't have to worry about, creating information that you have to worry about trying to extract out of your systems because it was on a particular user's box. Because at the end of it, we can tear down the systems with a quick command and reestablish another pristine test environment with just a couple of quick commands. It's command line, and we've got another system up and running. Or we can even run them side by side with different configurations so that we can actually see what's going on there. So again, this type of environment gives us different scalability across all those different capabilities out there. So I will conclude with that. Again, I talk a lot about, there's a lot of details in here. And again, I will put up my contact information. If there's anything, feel free to reach out, or there's our website that you can actually reach out, find more about the insider threat work. But quickly, I'll go through. I see there's a couple of questions that came in over the chat. So somebody from in DC, can you give a sense of the cost of experience of using this cloud-based deployment versus what was there before? So we have been using this environment, this single stack cloud environment, since late 2020. And the environment that we set up and run, we've been carefully monitoring the cost, because that was one of the things that was very critical to us when we actually go out and work with some of our customers is this going to be a cost-effective approach for doing their testing? And so what we have done is we've been tracking that time over since 2020. So we've been running for a year and a half with 3 to 4 of us at a time, bringing up multiple environments, and actually working with one of our customers where they actually have a system that we've dedicated for them to run, and that's been running for over a year now. The cost for us to run this has been less than the cost of one of the servers that we would have put in our VM infrastructure. So again, very cost effective, especially since we're at the end of the day, when we're done testing, we just tear down the system or suspend the systems. When the systems are suspended, it's pennies or dollars on the day to keep a configuration set up and being able to come back and reuse those systems. The question, so how can someone get started building their own cloud-based insider threat testing platform? So one of the things that we're looking to do as we're sort of building this out is eventually we want to open source what we're capable of doing here. So a lot of this is based around, those, the nice thing about this approach that we're doing is once we kind of get this worked out and get through, some of the testing and making sure that it works out, is that we can just, we currently put all our scripts in a code repository, and eventually all we need to do is eventually release that code repository. And then, you would just then require to, get some of the, have access to a cloud environment and, go through these different, configurations. And so you should be able to bring those kind of capabilities up and run within your own network. And then our goal right now is we're running it within our environment. Our goal over the next year is to start getting this into other people's hands, and then hopefully get it open source down the road. So with that, I don't see any more questions. I will turn it back. And again, thank you for your time today, and I'll turn it back over to Randy.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Bob. Very interesting conversation. Bob did provide his contact information on the slide. So if you do have additional questions regarding his presentation, feel free to reach out to him directly or going to the Software Engineering Institute's website and specifically looking for insider threat research. You'll find an alias that'll be available to send additional questions to Bob and the team here within the CERT division of the Software Engineering Institute. Thanks, Bob. So at this point, we're up to our first break of our symposium for today. As we come back from a 10-minute break, we're going to pick up with our first panel. The first panel will be Technical Advances in Moving from Data to Decisions, moderated by your own Dan Costa here. So we look forward to that panel presentation as well as the rest of the agenda for today. And just a reminder, we'll be doing this again tomorrow as well. So thank you very much for participating in the morning. Let's take a 10-minute break and we'll pick up with our first panel in 10 minutes. Thank you.
protect your organization from the risks of employees leaving and taking proprietary data with them. Employees take data for many reasons, such as financial gain, competitive advantage, or even revenge. This results in loss of revenue, damage to reputation, and even legal problems for your organization. Forcepoint has the tools to help you collect, explore, and gain insight into how users are interacting with your most critical and sensitive data. Collect behavioral data from channels such as web, file extensions, keyboards, and email. Explore meaningful data using a powerful dashboard built for analysts by analysts. Gain insight with powerful analytics to understand and rapidly respond to risky behaviors before harmful events occur. Don't just wait and watch for data leakage. Uncover risk before it becomes a problem. Next to your people, your intellectual property is one of your most valuable assets. With Forcepoint Insider Risk Solutions, you can protect both. Please schedule a demo today.
Hello and welcome back to the CERT Insider Risk Management Symposium. My name is Dan Costa. I'm the technical manager of the Enterprise Threat and Vulnerability Management team here at the Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute. I'm really pleased to be serving as the moderator for the next panel we have during our symposium this year, Technical Advances Moving from Data to Decisions. I'm joined by two distinguished panelists. First, Bradley Markides, the head of the Insider Trust program at the APSA Group Limited Bank. Bradley, thanks for joining us. Hello, welcome.
Hello, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Also joined by Michael Tice, our chief engineer within our Enterprise Threat and Vulnerability Management team here at the SEI. Michael, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, gentlemen, we've got a really interesting topic lined up here, technical advances in moving from data to decisions. Before we get things started with hearing from you all about what you're seeing as the types of programs and questions that programs have to answer change, and how technology kind of fits into helping answer those questions. I'd like to open the floor to each of you for a little bit more of a thorough introduction, as well as any opening remarks you might have. So Bradley, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, certainly. So a bit of a backdrop for the organization to gain some context, and then maybe this paves the way forward for answering some of the questions in terms of changes that we see coming through. Our organization is a financial service provider. It is a large-scale company. By way of benchmarking, we are 50,000 users strong. We have a presence over the African continent. We have our headquarters based in Johannesburg, South Africa. And our program has been 4 years in the running. So literally we're stepping out of that build phase and stepping into operations. And with us stepping into operations, that's where I'd like to add a bit of value and a bit of insight in terms of changes that we've been exposed to and how this might help other programs be more aware or try and adapt and anticipate some changes that we've been experiencing.
Tremendous. Thanks, Bradley. Okay, Michael, how about a little bit more on your background and any opening remarks if you've got them?
Okay, great. So I'm a retired counterintelligence special agent, which I did for about 25 years. Concurrently with that, I did 30 years of computer systems engineering. After I retired from the government, I had my own company doing the computer systems engineering type stuff. And then after 9/11, I came back. So one of the first things I had to do was, after the initial push from the 9/11 fallout, was help government organizations understand the internal type threat. So at that time, we called it cyber counterintelligence, and I helped them build one of the first programs. Since then, I've moved on again from the government. Now I'm with Carnegie Mellon in the CERT program, helping to take all the research that's being done here and transition it out into an operational type of a thought process, what we call transition. What I'm really excited about is hearing from Bradley, but I'll be also interested in answering any questions that the audience has as we go along.
Excellent. Thanks, Michael. Well, why don't we jump right in, gentlemen? I'd like to hear from both of you about changes you're seeing over the last several years with respect to the types of questions that insider threat and insider risk management programs are being asked by their stakeholders, and really the changes in the types of decisions that your insider risk management or insider threat programs that you're working with directly or ones that you've seen have changed over the last several years as the threat landscape has changed so significantly. So Bradley, why don't we get started with your thoughts and your experience there, and then we'll hear from Michael as well.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. So starting off, I think just with that backdrop, 4 years in the making with our program, and what we've seen at the moment is a notable shift or change as we step out of the build phase, going into the operational phase. And when we get into the operational phase, there is a requirement for maturing our team, our people, our skill set, our processes, and our technology, all in the support of insider threat management. And the most noticeable change coming along has been how we evolve the program and tailor the program's capabilities to support business requirements, more so than what we initially thought of or had in terms of our generic monitoring as a program in its development. So where we find ourselves today is business came with us on the journey in terms of deploying and building out an inside threat program, but not fully utilizing the capabilities that were landed as soon as the program stepped into operations. However, with that being said, there's a bit of rhythm that the program picks up on as soon as we start our operations, and our operations have been running for the past year now. So with that rhythm and showing some value, businesses started to take note. And with them taking notes, asking ITP in terms of assistance with defined use cases, with more pronounced requirements that can aid their control environments in terms of monitoring and looking for emerging insider risks. Ultimately, what we find is there is good use case and good potential in our potential risk indicators that we use to highlight manifestation of risk. And business has been adopting that into their control environment where there is some gaps and weaknesses. And this helps highlight concerning or arising insider risk behaviors. There's a bit of a push and a pull, to be honest. So as much as business is coming to us, we also go into business. There is a reliance on business that we are placing over there to be informed of those use cases to help us tailor the capabilities more so into the business sort of environment. Obviously, this was done previously in terms of starting off the program, factoring in those incidents and those use cases. But as I say, it's with time and maturity that businesses start to see value and wants ITP to be part of building bespoke solutions, frontline, backline, and in high-risk environments to start informing those insider risk behaviors. Hope that makes a bit of sense. That's the main sort of change and influence that we've seen stepping out of the build phase and into operations, being able to augment and adapt the program as we mature and support the business risk priorities going forward.
Yeah, that was great, Bradley. I think you're on a journey we've seen many organizations kind of take. And one of the things that strikes us as a key pillar to your success has been kind of your ability to engage the lines of business, understand their policies and practices, because that forms the foundation for being able to, from a security perspective, identify anomalies relative to what normal looks like within those business processes. And the most effective way to do that is working closely with those folks to understand those business processes in a way that only they do. So can you talk a little bit about kind of how you were able to establish that relationship and get their buy-in early on? So for so many other organizations, that can be the hardest part.
Yes, certainly, absolutely. So initially starting off with the formation of a multidiscipline group, dubbed the Insider Trust Working Group. In its initialization, we had about 16 C-suite executives join the program, and this is from an array of to bring in more of a steering committee to aid the program as we evolve into the next journey of the program. That sort of steering committee that we formed over there, we could think of it as a community of excellence or practice. We meet on a quarterly basis and we discuss the insider risk posture as it relates to the organization and those environments where we need to focus the priorities of the program. Definitely leveraging on executive and senior support to have those initial kickoffs and initial engagements, bringing people together. But then it's down to strategic decisions and tactical decisions that are led by myself and the program team in terms of stepping into business, looking in the certain control environments and tailoring our program to assist with the visibility into the insider risk and threats that they experience.
Fantastic stuff, Bradley. I think there's a lot there that our viewers can take away with respect to, finding the way to crack the nut of engaging the lines of business to help them understand, what we're trying to do from an insider threat, insider trust, insider risk management perspective, and get what we need from them to help them, securely and safely continue to carry out their missions. Michael, want to bring you in here as somebody with a multitude of insider threat program building experience across the government and industry as well. Want to get your thoughts on how you've seen kind of the use cases for insider threat programs change, particularly over the last couple of years.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. That was a good segue in the thought process where, as my role as the chief engineer, I'm really looking at strategic engagements with both government, public, and private sector. So in those roles, there are some commonalities and there are some things that are a little bit different. Going back to 2020, what I first saw was, in fact, we had a chat discussion about this, was that most organizations felt like the big thing that was going to happen is data exfiltration, because now people weren't in the building on the inside network. They're, teleworking, they're remote. We're going to lose lots and lots of data. A concept that's pretty common in government or at least in military organizations called priority information requirements. And so I think as a program, you're trying to listen to that executive leadership. You're trying to listen to their priority information requirements and come up with, how am I going to collect data on that? Now, the good news was, at least at that time, what we were being told is that they didn't really see a big uptick in that problem. I mean, the amount of policy violations are still, maybe fairly constant, maybe a little bit lower even than they were before, because people were already working from their homes. So now you get into a situation, though, where you could be only looking at those priority information requirements, and you get into the low-hanging fruit. So you're doing those things, and then you're not able to evolve out of that. So the next thing that I really saw was with COVID and the pandemic, the vaccine mandate requirements, and programs suddenly realizing that the population within the organization may not all be in agreement with the need to have vaccines. And so now a PIR, or priority information requirement, might be, how many of these people are going to leave? How many of them are going to try to find new jobs? How many of them are going to, act out in non-productive work behaviors because they're upset with the organization or with the government or whoever is requiring them to have these. And then I think the third evolution I saw was something that Greg Twohill mentioned, which was about the mass resignation, right? The great migration out of organizations. Okay, now we're sort of coming out the other side. Maybe an organization is saying, okay, everybody back in the office, and people are saying, well, I don't necessarily want to do that, so I'm looking for some other employment. So now the requirement comes into the program of, like, how do we identify when people are going to leave, or they're happy or they're not happy? And so one of the things that I think it becomes a challenge is, how were you instrumented to collect data? What kinds of data were you collecting? And can you actually analyze it for this new priority information requirement, a PIR? So looking at, maybe what do you call it? Sentiment analysis and things like that might help you figure out how to detect that the population's thought process is changing. People might be leaving, that type of thing. But the ultimate thing is that if you're always stuck on looking for the low-hanging fruit, it's really hard to evolve into these new information requirements that are being asked of the program, and the new types of data you have to collect and the new ways that you have to analyze it.
That's a great lead in to where we're going next, Michael, which is, as these kind of new use cases, or really the priority of kind of previously existing use cases, has changed within programs. Because for years, we've been telling everybody, a conservative estimate of 2/3 of individuals leave the organization with company confidential information. So we've known it makes good sense to watch for the leavers, right? But when the rates of people leaving the organization significantly increase, it changes the calculus with respect to kind of how priority that recommendation ends up becoming. So as we're seeing kind of these decisions, or maybe even just the priority of making some of these decision support systems kind of happen, so we see it change, where are you seeing technology changes in terms of the tools that are deployed or the data sets that are being more or differently used to support these different decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dan. There is some very promising work that's going on in different areas, like sentiment type analysis. Initially, sentiment analysis was more of this person is angry, this is an angry email, or this is a happy email. But really trying to look at the fact that we're talking about human beings, and human beings are very complex. And so they're going to change from day to day. So a specific message, email, or whatever is not nearly as important as the baseline of my person, my employee, who I'm trying to keep a good employee, who I'm trying to keep actively engaged and a good, productive person. How are they changing over time? How do we recognize that they may now need some assistance from us? So there are some tools that are working in that area. Other areas of interest and concern are like what Greg Twohill mentioned about misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. So some promising work out of the Carnegie Mellon campus, looking at how do you map social networks within your own organization and understand how information flows within those social networks. So in other words, let's say a piece of misinformation somehow gets into your organization. Where does it go from there? How does it propagate? What are the impacts of it? And so looking at sort of agent-based modeling, looking at trying to understand where those reinforcing sort of groups are that will take a piece of information and make it expand it out to the rest of the organization. So it's not necessarily anybody's doing anything wrong. It's an understanding thought process. So what technologies do I need to understand and sort of anticipate what might happen, like with people leaving, or with people wanting different types of benefits that maybe you're not currently providing. Another thing that I've always thought about was, I don't want to just answer those information requirements, because sometimes the organization doesn't even know what it doesn't know, or doesn't know what it needs. And so one of the things that I've seen recently, which is very exciting, is trying to determine what are the actual economics of insider threat controls or internal insider risk controls. So if the possibility of damage is $50,000, does it make sense to spend $1 million on a tool that will collect data to help me, prevent the $50,000 worth of damage? So looking at that, and data visualization is probably the other biggest point of, it's easy when you're on the team and you're a data scientist to maybe understand what's being seen and how it's being used. Trying to explain that to someone on a leadership team, or outside of that, like to HR, to legal, to anybody else, big challenge. The more you can visualize it, the way I've always said it is, if you can show somebody a videotape of a person robbing a store, it's pretty clear to them. You don't have to explain, like, this is the gun, this is how the gun was made, this is how the person acquired it, this is how we know he walked into the store, that kind of stuff. It's like, I just saw the video, it makes sense. So how do you visualize that complex data?
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I mean, lots of meat on the bone there. With an increased emphasis on predictive analytics, changes in the way that we're seeing text and natural language processing tools being utilized. It's certainly a really interesting time to kind of take a closer look at kind of being able to wrap your head around the efficacy of these different technology investments. So really excited to hear about the progress you all are making in the insider threat control economic space. Bradley, I want to circle back to you quickly and hear about kind of your utilization of technology as your program has kind of made the leap in recent years.
Sure, absolutely. Very similar to what Michael's touched on. So our focus at the moment is optimizing our technology platforms, looking at the way we acquire data, and also refining our system indicators. And specifically, the investments that we have at the moment is is on data visualization. So looking at advanced analytics, looking at business intelligence software, and being able to have a whole person view when we step back and we analyze the data. So maybe starting with the technology platforms. So not to label any sort of technology for the moment, but a technology stack that would allow us to picture data and pass that data on to our stakeholders to illustrate some of the risks and concerns that we are seeing. Those technologies would be very useful in displaying and visualizing the data. And ultimately, we're trying to graph more and illustrate risk more through MI, through the dashboards that we have. And then on the other side, the analytics that go into that to produce those dashboards, that's an area that we're focusing on at the moment. So we have a data science team that has been busy for the past 8 months exploring through our data hub. So we've got a data hub. It's a collection of semi-structured insider threat data. The majority of the data that we have is defined by the potential risk indicators that we have. So very mechanistic indicators, so we know what we know in our data. The interest that we have is what we don't know. And we've invited a data science team to come in and to do some statistical techniques on top of the data and assist us with the given indicators and look for threats and look for those unknowns. And when those are observed, can we start to adapt our potential risk indicators to those new threat indicators? A case in point would be, just earlier this week, our data scientists gave us an indication of our fraud data using a technique called RFM. I won't spend too much time detailing RFM. It's beyond my knowledge, but it stands for recency, frequency, and monetary. And what that's doing, it's taking our stock standard PRI, be it, let's look for X in a data set, and it's expanding that further to see if there's other similar behaviors that might exist within that potential risk indicator, equally suggesting there is risk. And this is a very new way that we can look at our potential risk indicators, refine the potential risk indicators, and ultimately what we want to do is move towards having heuristics as indicators. So being able to look at employee behaviors led by our potential risk indicators, and that's sort of what we are trying to also sell to our stakeholders at the moment with our continuous improvements. So in short, definitely technology playing a role as it should in adapting the program, adapting our indicators, and then also pushing towards visualization of the data. It speaks more worth and value than someone trying to speak technical to the stakeholders. Rather visualize it, and everybody can start to understand the picture and the progress that we are on. So yeah, that's pretty much our sort of focal point at the moment within this year with the optimizations. It's also doing those tweaks and enhancements to the technologies, the system indicators, and our data sources.
Bradley, you mentioned what's working for you from an insider threat hub building perspective. Where do you see the biggest challenges that you've been able to overcome? What are the hardest things about kind of building out an insider threat program hub?
Yeah, absolutely. No easy task to do. And I think, one big learning that I could take away from how we've built out the hub, it's not that there's a lack of data to build that. Really, the challenge has been the access and the sharing of information that is not necessarily easily achieved. And this maybe speaks back to the culture of the organization, the data culture specifically of the organization. Naturally, maybe as a financial service provider, we're not inclined to share the data as easily. But what sort of helps us in overcoming that, again, deferring to senior stakeholder support, that steering committee that we have formed, being able to position and table requirements for the data, understand the pros and cons from a business risk, from a people risk perspective, and that sort of sells the requirement that ITP requires in terms of acquiring that data. And that has seemed to help us. Obviously, in some instances, there's more pushback and challenges, In one example, we had 8 months delay in terms of receiving a specific data set. And that's just because senior leadership wanted more justification and warrant for stepping into the data sources. And all of which is good. Those check and challenges help refine the indicator and make it more appropriate and more fit for purpose in its use case. And then the other side, just to mention quickly, apart from stakeholder buy-in and support, you will be faced with legacy systems, outdated support. No one has a data dictionary to assist you in terms of deciphering the data fields and the columns. Even worse, there are projects and data migration projects that have an influence on the data hub program, on the data hub formation itself. So all of these just, act as additional hurdles that we need to cross in terms of delivering out our central data hub. And to try and work through that, the only suggestion I could really put forward is make sure you build strategically and partner with those CIOs and the different work streams that are delivering out those data systems, those migration projects, and make sure that there is visibility of the program, there is visibility for an interlock and integration to bring in the data into the ITP data hub. It's all about just having a bit of foresight and just working with the organization as we go through any transitions or changes. Thanks, Dan.
Tough challenges indeed, and great recommendations, Bradley. We did have an audience comment come through, and Michael, I wanted to get your thoughts on this, but there was a recommendation that came from Dave H. about bringing in an external party to assist with kind of making an objective measure of your current security postures that pertains to insider threats to really facilitate and foster senior leadership buy-in. Michael, I was wondering if you could share with our audience a little bit on some of the tooling and measurement instruments that we've produced that can give organizations a lightweight mechanism by which they can kind of measure the efficacy of their insider threat program building efforts.
Yeah, sure, definitely. Let me address the first part first, which is bringing in someone from the outside. I think everyone has this experience that you could have said the same thing 10 times to leadership, but you bring in someone from the outside who says the same thing and they go, wow, that is a great idea. We need to do that. Because the consultant, the outside voice recognized the same thing. So that's an important aspect. Bringing in those types of tools and things that come from the outside as well. So, for example, there is a fairly lightweight insider risk program management evaluation tool that is available by DHS CISA, and we could always get you the link on that later. There are the Common Sense Guide version 7 that Greg mentioned, which should be out soon, has a best practice 22, which actually talks about how to collect your own data and analyze it so that you can come up with those use cases, which I think what Bradley was explaining would help if you said, here are our incidents that have happened. Here's how we systematically and scientifically coded them. Here's what the result is. We need these data sources for X amount of these use cases, and that's why it's a high priority, which would be helpful. There are other things that you could do. You could do an evaluation of your program in a more in-depth way, which we have developed an ability to do that. And then there's vulnerabilities too. So what are your vulnerabilities from insider risk or insider threat type things? And that should, whatever you end up using, should be something that was developed based on scientific methods and processes that are comparable year over year, time over time, when you're actually reevaluating yourself. We would recommend a self-assessment every 12 months, and then maybe bring in an outside third party every 3 years or so to make sure that your self-assessments are still honest.
Thanks, Michael. All right, gentlemen, we are almost at our time. Bradley, I wanted to turn it back over to you for any closing thoughts you might have. And again, thanks for your sharing and the great work that you're doing there.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Michael, as well. I guess just in closing, my experience of standing up an INT, of standing up an inside threat program, it's definitely not a race, although at times it does feel like it, and trying to position that view to the stakeholders that we need time to mature, time to develop, and time to grow as a program. There are so many components to the program. The technology and the platform is one such component, and that's what we're talking about here today in terms of the data and the tech. You know, the other side to the program is making it more humane at the end of the day, and that's also an important component that we need to focus on equally for the program. So making sure we provision the program correctly with our resources, with the skill sets, making sure we deliver out the training and awareness that's needed to the organization as the first line defense. So there's just a lot to consider about a program as you move from build to operations. And as you step into the operations, you'll start to have that eye-opener in terms of those different components and how they all start falling into place and informing what an effective program should look like. So thank you, Dan. That's it.
Thank you, Bradley. Michael, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just have a quick one since we're almost at the end. I think information sharing is the key. In any insider risk program, you're wanting to share across the organization so that when HR has an incident with a person and security has an incident with a person and IT has an incident with a person, that you all know it's the same person, so that you now have something bigger to consider than those individual policy violations. The same thing should happen with the organization, talking to other organizations in a community of interest, because maybe you haven't seen this internal risk problem yet, but they have, or 2 or 3 organizations have. Now you can start planning for how would I detect it? Where would I get the data? How would I handle it if it actually occurs? So thank you for inviting me. I appreciated being here.
Bradley, Michael, thank you both very much. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break, and we'll be back with our day 1 keynote presentation. Welcome back to the 9th annual CERT Insider Risk Management Symposium. This time, I am so pleased to be joined by our keynote speaker for this event, Mr. James Chappelle. James is the director of the Department of Defense Insider Threat Management and Analytics Center. Prior to his role as the director of the DITMAC, James served as the deputy director and chief of analysis and mitigation for the DITMAC as well. James comes to the DITMAC by way of a decorated career in public service. And we are so pleased to have him here to give us the government perspectives and really his perspectives on the way that decision-making and data-driven decision-making is changing for his department and for the mission, the counter-insider threat mission more broadly. So James, thank you. Welcome. It's great to have you. Floor is yours, and looking forward to catching up on the back end of this with any questions that we've got from our audience.
Thanks, Dan. And first, let me say thank you to the whole CERT team for putting this together and giving me the opportunity to speak. It's a unique opportunity as we roll into National Insider Threat Awareness Month to bring a number of insider threat professionals from across the community together and just give everybody an opportunity to share some of what's happening at their locations and see how we can really maximize the sharing of information to improve our own organizations. And what we see is really an evolution. And speaking of evolution, I think we've seen a very rapid evolution over the last 2 years. As we managed to navigate some of the challenges affiliated with COVID, and nobody thought they were going to get through a seminar without hearing about COVID, right? So it's been a challenge, right? So the world has really changed overnight, and it's really taking a lot of time for us, not just us as insider risk, insider threat professionals, but really everybody to adapt and assess what this really means as we roll into, I don't want to say a new normal, but really a new normal, right? Where we've got blended work environments, where we've got an increased amount of telework, and we're really facing a lot of new challenges. We saw recently the Great Resignation, and now we're seeing the quiet quitting trend. And so there's a lot of things that are happening that really we as insider threat professionals, insider risk professionals need to think about, assess, and determine what that means for us. But I would offer, I guess, that as much as it seems like things are changing, they're really staying the same. All of those things are really behavior-based activities, and that's where we really have to recognize from an insider risk perspective how valuable our insights really can be. And some of that comes down to understanding and knowing the culture of your organization and what that looks like, and how has that changed over the last few years, and what does that really look like now that you're in a virtual environment. One of the things that it makes me consistently think about is my time when I was a non-commissioned officer in the Army, and everything was small group leadership. And so we go back to everything is behavior-based, but regardless of how many cool tools or capabilities you have on the system, everything's behavior-based. Everything goes back to small-based leadership, and really understanding the culture of the organization, how folks fit within that culture, and whether they feel like they are really engaged at work. That was interesting. We go back and look at the surveys that are done on cultural engagement and workplace engagement by Gallup. And what we saw from 2010 through 2020 was an increase in the amount of engagement that was actually taking place at the workplace, where it was around 30% and increased over to about 36%. And then over the last 2 years, we've seen another drop back down to 32%. And so there's an increase or a decrease in engagement within the workplace. And then what we're also seeing is an increase in active disengagement, where folks are actually just completely checked out of what they're doing at work. And that is almost at 20%. So if you look at the numbers, about a third of the workforce is engaged and about a fifth of the workplace is actively disengaged, which creates a lot of vulnerability, a lot of risk for our workplaces to evaluate, to look at, and to really try to understand. And so how does all of this relate to insider risk? How do we become part of the solution? And I know that there was talk about how we go from data to decisions as the big theme. And so part of this is really trying to understand where your seat is at the table. Do you have a seat at the table when it comes to insider risk? Do you understand the efforts that are being taken by human resources, by the organization's leadership to try to garner that buy-in, that real engagement from the organization? Do leaders know what they're looking for? For the folks who are teleworking on a regular basis, what's the battle rhythm for check-in with employees? And how is that engagement taking place? And so I think that from an insider risk, insider threat perspective, if we want to really start to look at how we influence the decision-making process, we have to have a seat at the table. We have to be in the room where it happens, right? And we have to be engaged in the discussions that are taking place. So I think that's one part where we want to try to start to understand what is the engagement with the workforce. Another part of that is, again, engaging with your HR and trying to understand from the exit interviews, if you can get data from exit interviews, why are people leaving the organization? Is there cultural challenges that you can evaluate and assess and try to get better information on? That is another place where we can potentially start to find an impact. What are the programs that are available within your organization to really be able to refocus that? So if you do find things within the data, if you find trends, if you find areas of risk or individuals at risk, do you, as the insider risk person for your organization, do you know what the options are? Do you know how to help rehabilitate the individual and get them back into the workforce? Typically, organizations spend a lot of money to bring folks on board and to train them and to get them to the point where they need to be. And so it's a greater investment, perhaps, to then find a way to get them back into the workforce and rehabilitate them. And so that's one of the things that, from a departmental perspective, one of the things that I'm challenging my team to look at now is the full range of incidents. One, how do we get the reporting on the data? Where is it coming from? Two, what are we doing about it? How are we analyzing it? And then the next part is really, okay, then so what actions were actually taken? Who did we get the information to, and what did they do with it? And what's the final outcome? Did the person get the mental health counseling that they needed to get back on track? Did we kick this over to law enforcement because there was a potential law enforcement concern or counterintelligence or whatever the case may be? And so starting to tell the full range of stories that, I know from a departmental perspective, a lot of people within the DoD want to catch the next spy. I think that we can show additional value by showing how many people we've been able to support and rehabilitate to get back into the workforce, because that's a huge investment that we are making on the government side, especially as we look at it within the department, not immune to the challenges, right? So right now, employees across the world realize that they are more empowered. They can work from a lot of different locations, and there are a lot of different options, and some of them are more conducive to their personal lifestyles. Some are more financially flexible. And from the Department of Defense perspective, I know that there was some challenges hitting some of the recruiting numbers this year too. So it's even more critical that we find the right way to help support the troops and make sure that they are able to stay in the workforce, stay in the formation to help fight and win our nation's wars. And so we want to try to find the value there. And so I think that there's more than one way to show value from an insider threat, insider risk perspective, and really take the data and help our decision makers make the right decisions, make informed risk-based decisions. And we do that by holistically trying to collect as much of the information as possible and give them options. And so I think that's the last part that I would offer to folks is in understanding the culture and talking with your human resources and your leadership teams. You need to understand what the full range of options are available to you and your organization. How do you best assess this? And that gives you an opportunity to bring not just challenges, not just issues, but also potential solutions to the table. And when we start to get to those potential solutions and you see them go to the finish line, then you can start to demonstrate additional value to the organization and show we were able to keep this many people within the workforce. We were able to take action to stop this many documents from being exfiltrated or from a potential workplace violence act from taking place. And so we have a big job. We all have a really big job. When you think about the wide world of insider risk and data exfiltration, potential workplace violence, just the number of potential incidents that could take place, the number of people that are in the different workplace and the potential motivations for how they get to those locations. It's a big job. It's a challenging job. We have to do the best we can to tell that story so that we can get the resources that are necessary to make sure that we've got the safest environment possible for everybody to come to work. So with that, hopefully that provides you some different thoughts, some aspects of things that I'm thinking about as we try to move forward within the Department of Defense, thinking of insider threats. And oh, I guess one last parting shot. And I keep saying one last. Maybe there's many in my head that just keep bouncing around. Actively engage face-to-face as much as possible. We have learned that we can do a lot of collaboration virtually through things like Zoom and Microsoft Teams and things like that. And this is great because it gives people an opportunity to view it where they're at and save resources. But there's nothing quite like building a relationship like doing it face-to-face. And I have the opportunity to come to CERT next week and meet some of the team there. I'm very excited to do that. I'm actually doing this call from Joint Base Charleston right now because there's ongoing activities as we're trying to build up additional support capabilities to the Department of Defense within the Insider Threats program. So take the time to build the relationships. Do it as much as you can face-to-face. Understand the risks that are there and make sure that you bring solutions and opportunities for your leadership to consider and just understand your culture. And I think that if you can do all of those things, which is no small task, it won't be easy, you'll be successful and our insider risk programs will become stronger. And my hope is that we'll see engagement scores across the world begin to increase again, because we'll be finding ways to get our employees re-engaged in the workforce that they're a part of. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, James. And wanted to bring a couple of questions, comments, thoughts that are starting to come in from the audience, if you're willing to entertain a couple of questions. The first is about
the easy ones, Dan. Only the easy ones.
Good. I'll bring the lowest hanging fruit. So the first question, James, is about how you're measuring percentages of workforce engagement and or disengagement.
Yeah, so the numbers that I cited come from a Gallup poll, and within the federal government, there's a federal employee viewpoint survey, and so I don't know the questions off the top of my head, but if you go back and you do a quick Google search on Gallup engagements or even federal employee viewpoints, there's a number of different questions that they will survey employees on, and each one of those is given a level of indicators of potential engagement or disengagement of what the employees are actually feeling doing at work. So it's not are you engaged at work? There's a number of different questions that actually lead to, and I think it's broken down into like 10 or 12 different subcategories that they're able to then track that on. But that's where I pulled that data from.
And James, a follow-on to that, could you speak a little bit to the so what from the results of a survey like that? So where do you see the insider threat program's role in doing something in response to kind of changes in the rates of workforce engagement or disengagement?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would postulate then that if an employee is less engaged at work, they're more likely to make potential mistakes. And so that goes to the potential insider risk category as opposed to the threat category. And if they're also less engaged at work, they may be more inclined to be seeking other opportunities that may become available to them. And so, we know that the greatest risk for employees is around 45 to 60 days prior to their departure from an organization. Well, if your employee is disengaged and looking for other opportunities, then there's a good possibility that they may be departing soon, which increases the risk for potential loss. So I think that's where I would make that bridge, make that connection, and try to really start. Again, this goes back to a culture thing. Why are people more engaged in certain locations than they are in others? Do they feel micromanaged? Do they feel like they're not contributing to something from a societal perspective? Do they feel like they're underpaid? Those are things that organizationally everybody's going to have to sort out for themselves. But at the end of the day, if your employees are disengaged, if they're not feeling like they are part of the team, if they don't feel like they're contributing, they're probably going to seek opportunities elsewhere to do that. And in a best case scenario, you're probably going to have to end up trying to find a viable replacement, which costs the company money. Or in a worst case scenario, you could have data exfiltration or other careless, sloppy, potentially other insider risk type of avenues that could be pursued.
It's the flip side of a coin that we studied a few years ago. We were looking at the role of positive incentives for insider threats, where when we saw measures for connectedness to your job and to the organization and to your colleagues, and your perceptions of organizational support and how fairly you felt like you were being treated by the organization, as those levels increased, we saw a reduction in the frequency of occurrence of insider incidents within those organizations. And so it wasn't a causal relationship that we were able to establish, but it's correlative, and it kind of makes intuitive sense, right? I wanted to circle back to something that you had mentioned in your opening remarks about the localized nature of, kind of setting culture. And I wanted to get your take on, what the most important tools or skills or resources to get into the hands of those frontline managers and supervisors that do play such an important role in kind of setting that culture and are one of our strongest kind of influence points from an insider risk management perspective. One of the most important things to be getting into those folks' hands from your perspective.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's so individualized, and that's why it's small unit leadership. If it was something that we could say, here's the magic code, we would just go ahead and code the whole organization, and we wouldn't have any issues. And so this is where it comes back to, again, this is a people business. It's a evaluating behavior type of business. And I think, I don't want to misattribute the quote. I think it might have been Simon Sinek that said the soft skills are hard. And so it's trying to understand, right, like what makes people tick? Why do they want to be there? What makes them want to come to work at that organization on a daily basis? Are they inspired by money? Do they want to find the next promotion? Do they believe in the why of the organization? What is motivating them? And what kind of attention do they need? There's some folks that might need a daily check-in. They might need the daily face-to-face on the video. And there might be some other folks who just want to be left alone for 2 weeks to go work on their project. It's imperative, and this is why you can't just promote supervisors from the people who are best at doing their job. You have to find the people who are going to be able to have that level of interaction, who are going to be able to come out and ask folks, how do you want me to interact with you? How do you want to feel like you're being engaged? And it sounds silly, right? Do I really need to go ask all of my direct reports how they would like to be engaged? Sometimes you might. If you can't build that relationship and you can't figure it out, and it's extremely tough to do virtually, you might have to ask, what's, what made you decide to come here? What makes you, happy, every day? And for some folks, it might be, hey, I want my every other Friday off because I want to go spend time with my kids down at the park or whatever. You might be surprised at what some of the answers might be. And so I think that's the part where I can't give the magic pill to the supervisors on the ground. What I can say is, here are the indicators to look for, from an insider risk perspective, which I think we all have, kind of in our back pockets. But when we start talking about leadership and leadership 101, it's a matter of helping them understand it's a discussion. You need to understand the people, where they're coming from. And it can be uncomfortable sometimes, right? It's not always going to be the most comfortable conversation. It can be awkward and clunky, especially if you're a first-time supervisor. That's okay. It'll get better. It'll get more comfortable. And as time goes on, you'll get to know those people even better. And that's where you'll start to notice changes in behavior, right? You'll notice where somebody's not checking in the way that they usually did. Their sentence structure is different than what it used to be, right? They're no longer writing the 3 paragraphs. They're giving 1-sentence answers, things like that. And that's where the potential indicators will come in from an insider risk perspective. Hey, I think something's wrong and I don't know what it is. And so that's where you can potentially get help and get ahead of unusual behaviors and try to help people and get them to be productive members of the team again.
Great. James, the theme of National Insider Threat Awareness Month this year is cognitive immunity. And I think we've kind of danced around the concept a little bit when we're talking about kind of the positive deterrence-based controls for mitigating insider threats and managing insider risk. Wanted to get your thoughts on kind of the concept of cognitive immunity and how the broader threat of misdis and malinformation plays into the modern counter insider threat mission.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Again, it comes to where we are right now in society, and what people are willing to, I don't want to say willing to believe, but where they're willing to get their information from. And the fact that we've got, obviously, enemies that are working against us, and they want to see a divided America. And our job is to try to find ways to make sure that people can see through some of those challenges. And it's not going to be easy. There's people get their information from so many different sources. There's so many different opportunities now, and I don't have the right answer for that, except to say, regardless of how things change, regardless of how technology adapts, everything is behavior-based. Everything is a person business when it comes to insider risk and insider threat. And so the causation of why Joe Smith is acting the way Joe Smith is something that, again, we can start to dig into, and we can start to identify, and we can start to have those conversations with Joe Smith. And then how those conversations take place with the leadership and with anybody else who may end up having to get involved will be important, because Joe Smith may have a very, very deep belief in what's being put out there. And so sometimes it's not always about being right. Sometimes it's about letting other people be heard and trying to find ways to get to a common understanding of what's important. So I don't think that answered your question at all, but I think I did a pretty good job of tap dancing around it. And I guess, the last part to reiterate is, regardless of, again, the causation, it's a people business. What we do is all about helping people, understanding people, and trying to make sure in doing so, we're protecting the assets of our organization.
Well said. James, really want to again thank you for your time, your thoughts, your expertise, and thank you again for joining us for this year's symposium as the keynote address. Really well done.
Thank you for having me. And again, I really appreciate everything that you and your team did, and I look forward to meeting a lot of you here in the next few weeks.
Likewise. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of our day one proceedings for the CERT Insider Risk Management Symposium. I want to thank our keynote speaker again. I want to thank all of our panelists and presenters from day one. And I certainly want to thank all of the questions that we received from our audience via YouTube. I want to encourage folks to continue bringing those questions in as we reconvene for day two of the Insider Risk Management Symposium tomorrow, September 8th, from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We've got another great set of conversations, discussions, and resources to share with you. So I certainly do hope you all will rejoin us again for day two tomorrow. Once again, thank you all for watching. Thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you to James, our keynote presenter. Have a great rest of your day and hope you'll join us for day two.